A clash at sea, causing waves of international concern. A Russian military ship rams into a Ukrainian tugboat off the coast of Crimea. The vessel was later fired at and captured by the Russians, along with 2 other ships and dozens of Ukrainian seamen, several of whom were injured. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting where Western countries accused Russia of stoking an already deadly war with Ukraine.
What we witnessed this weekend is yet another reckless Russian escalation. It is an arrogant act that the international community must condemn and will never accept.
In response, Russia's representative said the Ukrainian ship had violated its territorial waters. Moscow says the incident was a provocation by Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko to boost his support in upcoming elections. In Kiev, Poroshenko has declared a state of martial law for 30 days, but insisted it would not interfere with the looming presidential vote. In Brussels, NATO Secretary General warned Russia that its actions would have consequences.
There is no justification for the use of military force against Ukrainian ships and naval personnel. So we call on Russia to release immediately the Ukrainian sailors and ships it seized yesterday. And we call for calm and restraint.
Sea traffic is again flowing through the disputed waters after Russia briefly blocked the crucial passage. But Moscow says it will continue to hold the Ukrainian ships and sailors while it conducts its own investigation.
This outrageous violation of sovereign Ukrainian territory is part of a pattern of Russian behavior that includes the purported annexation of Crimea and abuses against countless Ukrainians in Crimea, as well as stoking conflict that has taken the lives of more than 10,000 people in eastern Ukraine.
Further escalation of the situation by the Russian Federation should not be ruled out. According to available intelligence data, there is a clear threat for invasion and seizing of Mariupol and Berdyansk. Further aggressive acts and provocations by the FSB Border Guard Service and Russian Navy remains a realistic possibility.
What Kiev has been doing in coordination with the United States and others to promote a conflict line against Russia is fraught with very dangerous consequences. We are going to curb any infringement of Russian sovereignty and territorial integrity, including the Sea of Azov and that area. We do hope that is clear.
Well, for more on this story, we're joined now by our DW correspondents Nick Connolly in Kiev and Emily Sherwin in Moscow. Good morning to you both. Nick, Ukraine has imposed martial law. What kinds of power does this give Ukrainian authorities, and how will that help them solve this crisis?
Good morning, Terry. Well, this is unprecedented in all the years of conflict we've seen here in Ukraine after the annexation by Russia of Crimea and the conflict in the east. This has never happened before. This is a first. Basically, this gives the government the option to restrict civil liberties, anything from freedom of speech to freedom of assembly, giving the police more powers and also potentially allowing for the mobilization of army reservists. Having said that, we still haven't seen much detail. This was voted through late last night in a pretty chaotic parliamentary assembly. It wasn't clear for a long time if it would actually get the required number of votes. It did. But whether this is just an option the government is giving itself for the case of further escalation with Russia, or if we're going to see a direct impact on everyday Ukrainians' lives, we still don't know, and this is what will come out of today, really.
Emily, in Moscow, Western nations are calling on Russia to release the Ukrainian sailors and ships it has seized. Is that likely to happen?
Well, Terry, it doesn't seem like there will be a concession on that issue from Russia anytime soon, especially because Russia considers that it's captured those vessels and those sailors absolutely legally. They absolutely here in Russia see that they acted correctly and according to Russian and international law. In fact, the Russian side has very much been categorizing what happened as a Ukrainian invasion. You have to remember that Russia considers the Azov Sea to be Russian waters after the annexation of Crimea in 2014, which, of course, Ukraine does not recognize. And Russia has also been categorizing Ukraine as the aggressor in this situation. Yesterday, we saw a statement from the FSB, the Russian security services, saying that actually it was the Ukrainian vessels that pointed their guns at the Russian vessels first and threatened them. So very much Russia categorizing Ukraine as being in the wrong and Ukraine as being the aggressor here. So I don't think any concessions on the crew and the vessels that were captured anytime soon, Terry.
So, Nick, as Emily points out, Russia regards what happened there as a Ukrainian invasion. Explain to us how the disputed waterway we're talking about here is shared and why it's so important to Ukraine.
Well, Terry, obviously before the Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014, you had Ukrainian-controlled Crimea on the western side of the strait and then the Russian mainland on the eastern side, and they shared control over this waterway to the Sea of Azov, which then also obviously is shared by Ukraine, by Ukrainian ports like Mariupol, and then the Russian side. Since Russia took over Crimea, basically, they have also had de facto control over access to the Sea of Azov, something that Ukraine and the West obviously do not recognize. But this is crucial not just for Crimea. This is not just something about sovereignty in an abstract sense. This is also about Donbass, about the other conflict that Ukraine has with Russia, because tens of thousands of jobs depend on the ports on the Sea of Azov being able to get trade in and out. If this sea turns into a military zone with no real access from outside, that could really destabilize the situation in the east of Ukraine, where it had seemed in recent months that things had become calmer and more stable.